All right, everybody. Hey, we are going to be getting into Judges 6 today. This is the story of Gideon. Good to see you. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hand of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel. Neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock in their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites, they cried out to the Lord for help. And when the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the God of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah. And we talked about that. We touched on that oak back in Joshua. It symbolized, I'm pretty sure it symbolized the presence of God, and that tree was planted pretty close to the tabernacle. So, anyway, that belonged to Joash the Abizarite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press to keep it from the Midianites. So this is the first that we see of Gideon. He's threshing wheat in a wine press so it won't get stolen. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, and he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, Lord." "Pardon me, Lord." It should be in a British accent. "Pardon me, Lord," Gideon replied. "But if the Lord is with us, why has all of this happened to us? Where are all his wonders our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the land of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?" Sounds a lot like Moses, doesn't it? "Pardon me, Lord," he says again. Gideon replied, "But how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." And the Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." And Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I came back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." And Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in the basket and the broth in the pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. This is going to get fun. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. So the angel of the Lord has a staff in his hand. Very interesting. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. Oof. So interesting. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." Wow, that's so beautiful. I don't remember that little story. To this day, it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. That same night, the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height." So now he's building an altar. Alright, so he's already given them an offering on a rock that God instructed him, but now God's like, take a second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal. Okay, so he's tearing down the false altar, cut down the Asherah pole beside it, so he's doing all the things that the Israelites have always been instructed to do, but haven't done, right? Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of that height, and use the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than at daytime. Interesting. That's also kind of like Nicodemus, in the New Testament. Nicodemus visited Jesus at night, and that's exactly what Gideon is doing with this offering to God. They asked each other who did this. When they carefully investigated, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did. So they found out eventually. Then the people of the town demanded of Joash, "Bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down our Baals and cut down our Asherah poles beside it." So they've become like religious about these things. They weren't just making Asherah poles and altars to Baal to appease their neighbors. They were really worshiping these gods, and so they were actually offended at what Gideon did. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, "Are you going to plead Baal's cause?" And he's kind of astonished like I was. "Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is God, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." So, because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, they gave him the name Jerub-Baal that day, saying, "Let Baal contend with him." That sounds also like Elijah, doesn't it? If Baal is really God, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. Similar spice coming from Joash right now. So Joash is clearly a godly man. And remember, Joash is Gideon's father. So now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped into the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. Wow. Okay, so yeah, then the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him. And he sent messages throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. So they too came up to meet him. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. This also reminds us, at least reminds me a lot of Moses saying, "Prove it, God," right? And Moses causes his skin, I believe, his hand, to turn into leprosy right in front of him. Yeah, I think that's the only thing that God does, but this is sort of a similar test, right? Gideon is like, "Please show me that this is real." Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." And that night God did so. Only the fleece was dry, and all the ground was covered with dew. All right, so that's the setting for Gideon. This is chapter 7. Gideon defeats the Midianites. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into your hands, or Israel would boast against me." Yeah, you have too many men. My own strength has saved me, is what you will say. And now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, with 10,000 remained. Can you imagine that? Now it's like, well, yeah, of course the 10,000 are going to be afraid, right? 22,000 just left. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." This is where we need like Pixar or Disney or DreamWorks, right? Like, it must have been a whisper. That's what I picture God like whispering to keep Gideon as he passed up certain men. But we don't know how it happened. It'd be amazing to see. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps them from those who kneel down to drink." 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save. With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept 300 who took around the provisions and trumpets of others. So 300 men. For all of you red-pilled guys, this chapter is for you. We got 300 men. What does that sound like? Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley thick as locusts, and their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. So gigantic outnumbering going on. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. And this man, so there's two Midianite warriors down in this valley. Gideon is spying them out, and this is what they say. "So I had a dream," he was saying. "A loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midian camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideonite heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midian camp into your hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars into the hands of all of them with torches inside. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." That's their battle cry, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard, and they blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow. They shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." It does kind of sound sort of like Jericho, right? Blowing trumpets and shouting really loud. While each man held his position around the camp, all of the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. And when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. Wow. So just complete craziness. The army fled to Beth Shittah toward Zerah, and as far as the border of Abel Mahalah near Tabbath. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh were called out, and they pursued the Midianites. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth Barah." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth Barah. They also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. And that will be all for today. I'll see you guys next time. We're going to talk about Zebah and Zalmunna in chapter